Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third in a series of seminar events being hosted by the Inland Center for Sustainable Development, which is a research arm of the School of Public Policy at the University of California, Riverside, or UCR. My name is Rick Bishop. I have the pleasure of being one of the staff here at ICSD. I'd like to acknowledge a few of our other ICS staff members who are with us today and have helped us to develop this 2023-2024 seminar series, which is devoted to the inland region's warehousing and logistics industry. First, Dr. Ron Loveridge is the ICSD founder and senior advisor. Dr. Chin-Fong Wong is a professor at UCR and is ICSD's co-director focusing on research. Kristen Kopko is ICSD's principal management analyst. Glad to have all three of them there. And then a special welcome to Dr. Mark Long, who is the Dean of School of Public Policy, who provides both support and guidance to the center. Just so as a brief background, ICSD was formed a few years ago and is intended to serve as a network center on its broker and resource and policy analysis on a number of issues that impact future growth in the two inland counties, being Riverside and San Bernardino. Our focus is on how the region can best incorporate practices that can simultaneously address growth, equity, and environment. Our research is funded by a number of members of our leadership council who represent both public and private sector entities and organizations within the two inland counties. They provide funding support to us, and they guide our work. To see a listing of all of ICSD's research funders and leadership council members, we would encourage you to go to the website, which is icsd.ucr.edu. You can also go to that website and find the prior two seminar events that we've held to date on this topic, so feel free to take a look at those. So just as a bit of background on this particular topic, this past spring, ICSD, as it was developing its research agenda for the next year, we held a focus group, which consisted of a number of experts and observers of manufacturing and logistics, so that we could learn more about this particular issue as we were thinking about developing a work program for, as I mentioned, the next 2 years. After we completed the focus session, it became very clear to us that we had much more to learn, and from a number of other people and experts in the region on this topic, and in order for us to kind of hone in on what needs to be done. Are there any niches of research that are missing where ICSD might be able to contribute to this discussion? And so we came up with this idea to have this series of seminars with panelists that represent different perspectives for this very, very important and growing industry in the region. So in September, we had a kickoff seminar. On October 11th, we examined with a panel the impacts of pollution and public health from this industry. On January 11th, our next session, we'll be taking a look at transportation and the warehousing and logistics industry in the region. But today we have a particularly important topic, and we're very pleased to have panelists of experts to help comment on this particular issue. We're taking a look at the issue of employment and quality of life in the region. So without further ado, let me introduce the panelists for today's session. First, we have Sharyar Kausji. Sharyar is the Executive Director of the Warehouse Workers Resource Center. Peggy Hazlett is the CEO for the Greater Ontario Business Council. And Dr. Johannes Munoz is the Professor and Chair of Spatial Economic Analysis and Regional Planning from the University of Redlands. We also have slated to join us Dr. Juan Delara from he's the Associate Professor of American Studies and Ethnicity from the University of Southern California. We're hoping that he'll be able to shortly. With that, welcome to the panelists. We appreciate you being here. Also wanted to mention to those of you that are participating in today's seminar series online, there is a Q&A box, a chat box, and we would encourage you to feel free to take advantage of that, ask any questions. If time allows, we'll pull some of the questions from the session today, and we'll relay those to the panelists. If we're not able to get all the questions, what has been our practice in the past is we'll compile them after the event. We'll farm them back out to our panelists and ask for them to respond, and then we'll get them, transmit them back out to you. So hopefully you leave this event very satisfied that your questions have been answered or will be answered, and also very educated with it. Let's see that Dr. DeLaura has joined us. Thank you very much. Doctor, would you like me to start over with the whole introductions, or can we just go right to it?
No, I think we can go. Sorry for that. I sent a note saying that I was running a little late, but I'm sorry for that.
No problem. We're glad to have you. So let's get right to it. So thank you again for all four panelists for being here, and for those of you that are joining us. Okay, so the first question is, we're talking about impacts of logistics and warehousing on employment and quality of jobs in our region. And anybody feel free to answer the question first, and the others can certainly chime in. So the first question, discuss the most important impacts of the concentration of the warehousing and logistics industry on employment and quality of jobs in the region. And then if you can, talk about your organization's experience, either direct or indirect, with these impacts.
All right, I'll be happy to start out with just a brief overview in terms of what the logistics sector really means. I don't think that at this point
You're breaking up on us, Johannes. We're not hearing you.
Oops. Sorry, there was a technical hiccup that I had, and so like it interfered with the different devices at the same time. I apologize. So,
No
but for a brief introduction, I think it's really hard to overestimate the importance of the logistics sector for the Inland Empire at this point in the economic development of the Inland Empire, and actually also for the Southern California region. And so it's by now the largest employer. It's about 16.4% of all employment in the Inland Empire actually is in the logistics sector. That is even larger than healthcare and pretty much everything else. It's has seen an incredible rise, especially due to the pandemic, with a large and unprecedented and unforeseen shift towards e-commerce. And since e-commerce and distribution centers have a much larger employment requirement than the traditional logistics where we just handle imports, it's seen an incredible increase in employment. Such concentration, of course, that provides lots of jobs, and that's always great. If you're looking for a job and you don't have one and you can get one, that's just wonderful. So there's nothing that can be said against that. There are, however, from an economics perspective and from more of a larger, higher up view towards this, there are concerns about this. And so first of all, it's a derived demand. Logistics demand is always one that is due to somebody else needing to move something for whatever reason. So, and that right now is, for us, three major sources as I see it. Number one is imports, meaning the ports of LA and Long Beach that are bringing goods in, and of course what we also ship through those ports. Secondly, local production, and then local distribution. That's the whole e-commerce side, and the e-commerce side was what really drove it. We've seen recently that thanks to the tensions in the Pacific Rim, that and other developments, also cooling down of the economy, that imports have dropped at the ports, and that automatically affects us here. Such concentration also, of course, produces with that a high dependence on just one economic factor. And I just want to leave it at this and go to other parts of this later on. But the benefits have now turned us into a situation where we face enormous risks, and I'd be happy to address them later.
Okay, hold that thought. We'll move on to other panelists.
So I think that's a great introduction. I think the fact of the region's dependence on this sector, the dominance of this sector and its growth over the course of the last 30 years is undeniable. My organization is organization dedicated to improving conditions in warehouses, and it's been around for a little over a decade. And what's interesting is that, even when we first got it started 10 years ago, 12 years ago, there was a debate over the quality of jobs, whether this industry was providing, adequate jobs and really helping boost the economy, especially coming out of the recession at that point. And there was a lot of debate and a question of, kind of what the sector was bringing to the region. We really started coming across workers in the community as we started bringing people together to raise standards, who are employed through staffing agencies, who are employed very short term, temporarily. And we didn't have great data about whether that was consistent. Over the course of the last decade, I think that has been fleshed out to be more clear that there is a significant percentage of this sector that is employing people at or close to minimum wage, that it's, as the sector has grown and become, as the professor said, a huge part of our regional economy, the jobs have not been as good as they could be. And I think this sector in particular has designed its work flows and its work systems in a way to really take advantage of that use of the staffing agency system, temporary work, to really keep a kind of a permanent underclass of workers who are always desperate to kind of get a permanent job. It also destabilizes the sector because those people who do have permanent jobs know there's always somebody always looking over their shoulder for the next person who's trying to get their job, doing that same job, sometimes for half the wage. So what we've seen is that this is happening in a sector that is dominated by some of the biggest companies in the world, Walmart, Amazon, companies that from our perspective can't afford to pay a living wage, can't afford to invest in this region in a way that they benefit greatly from this region because of so much of their freight. $1 trillion worth of freight comes through this area every year. Around 2019, 2020, the Brookings Institution started doing some research on the area and, started kind of really put some numbers to what we were always questioning is, those permanent jobs that we see do pay decent wages are not like the only jobs there are, but there is this whole sector, this kind of underclass of workers who are employed through the staffing agencies. And what we saw is that if you take all those jobs into account, not just the direct hires, but the temporary jobs, not only have, we had a huge amount of new jobs created which has been the driver of our regional economy, but the poverty rate has increased in the period of the last 25 years, that the number of people working poor has increased. And we think that is correlated directly with the fact that these people are working in warehouses. And then again, like I said, it doesn't have to be that way. These are not little mom and pop companies that are just trying to barely make it. This is Walmart, this is Amazon. They're gonna, need to move this freight through the region either way, and we should make sure that they're accountable.
We see here in Ontario that it's not just Amazon and Walmart. We do see the small mom and pops. We see the folks that are employing 25 to 50 employees that have been with them for 10, 15, 20 years. And we're also seeing an increase in the types of jobs or the change in the types of jobs that are in our warehouses. From one of our newest warehouses that opened in the south end of our city in South Ontario, it's 550 employees, and 95% of the jobs there are robotic and automated. And so these are higher wages and higher paying jobs. And again, with a company that has longevity in our community. So I think we paint a lot of times a broad brush when we're talking about logistics and warehousing. But I want to go back to just the creation of these warehouses and the types of jobs that brings with the construction industry. And these are skilled labor and these are good jobs. And so I want to break it down in a way. And it was interesting. I had a grad student come from UC Riverside and sit down and talk to me. And I said, do you know what kind of jobs are in some of these places when you just drive up and down Haven? There's manufacturing jobs there. It isn't just the perception of, these bad jobs, these jobs that are that we see the headlines with. And so I think that the narrative needs to change. I think that for our region, especially around this airport, the #1 cargo movement airport in the nation, we talk about the jobs that are at the ports, just talk about the jobs that are here at this airport. I mean, it's over 27,000 jobs that are generated out of this airport through this industry. And so I'd like to see a shift in the narrative. When we start to talk about these things, I'd like to see some change in, the way that the industry is upskilling its employees to make sure that they are the next generation of workers that we need to have to move with the technology changes that are happening in the industry.
Actually,
Can I get
Go
back? I
ahead.
haven't had a chance to talk yet.
Go
So
ahead.
I think one of the things that is really important, so many of you have hit on points that I think we need to dig a little deeper on. One is this question about the narrative, and I think it's a really important point to take into consideration, as Peggy just mentioned. One of the things that has to happen when we talk about this industry and we have a discussion about the narrative is the specificity of the kinds of jobs that are involved in this industry. And so I think when we speak briefly, broadly around warehouses and logistics, oftentimes the way that we count what we're talking about varies depending on who's doing the talking. Right. And so if we're talking about warehouse jobs, there are in fact many different types of warehouse jobs. And I think Peggy made a great point, especially if you're talking from the perspective of Ontario, where you do have, and the city of Ontario, decades ago made a decision that they were not going to lead as their economic model only on warehouses because they wanted to have a different kind of mix. Right. And certainly now with the transformation of the airport, that's changed because they're trying to deliver on some of that cargo capacity there. But I think that for a long time, the region was, sold, and the narrative for the region was this cheap dirt and cheap labor model towards regional development that was, widely bandied about as the solution because that was the only thing that was going to grow. And it led to a kind of model. I think somebody mentioned this earlier, where it's like, be grateful for the jobs that come and be glad that jobs are coming to the region. I think we've gotten to a point where just jobs is not enough, that we need to have a conversation about what kinds of jobs and who is actually having access to those jobs. We know that the region has changed dramatically demographically in terms of who is living in the region, the tremendous growth of the Latino population in that region. We also know what their educational levels are, and we know that their wages are lower when you compare it to the average wages and average educational levels in the region. So what happens when we're talking about upskilling, when we're talking about having access to better jobs, there is a kind of class and a racial dynamic taking place because we have to take into consideration who has the training and who has the access to those kinds of jobs. So it is a very, I think that the narrative has to change, but the way that we talk about upskilling and the positive benefits of this industry also need to take into consideration these variations that I've mentioned and have pointed out, because that's an important part of understanding how this economy is being affected by the region. One final point before I stop here is this question about it's a derived demand. I agree that historically logistics has been a derived demand, except when you have the introduction of giant companies like Amazon, where they're no longer just providing or meeting demands, but they're actually playing an important role in generating and producing demand. And so the fact that companies like Amazon are a market leader within logistics and warehousing, and the fact that they are not only delivering, but they are actually a retailer and a producer, means that they have integrated vertically this whole system where it's not just a derived demand. They're actually very, very much involved in the production of goods, but also in the production of a type of goods that continues to reproduce more and more demands, right? And so I think that those things all need to be taken consideration, especially when we look at, it's well studied and well known that if you think about what happens when Amazon introduces new fulfillment centers in a region, that there is a general deflation of wages or a coming down of wages for that that region. That has been widely studied and seen and known as the Amazon effect. So this is a particular interest to the Inland Empire because it happens to be the place where Amazon is based in terms of its Western distribution facilities.
Johannes?
So, I love those stories about the 540 or 550 people warehouse that has all those computerized jobs. But let's just look at the data. So the data tells us that we have in 2021, we had 4,299 warehouses in the Inland Empire. In terms of jobs in the whole logistics sector, transportation, warehouses, and utilities, that makes 185,800 jobs at that time. That's a wonderful 43 jobs per warehouse. That's the average. And so and that's 178 jobs per million square feet. So, the direction, I totally buy that. But we're far, far, far from the direction. So we really need to make sure that we are actually taking care of the what's here right now and evaluate what's here right now in the mass. And so I totally buy that Amazon is also a producer. But what share of the logistics industry in the Inland Empire is really affected by the Amazon producer share? That's not relevant relative to the overall manufacturing sector. That is part of the logistics demand that we have here. So I buy all that this is the future and that there are these extremes, but the average is far from this. And so we need to just be aware that since there is this very, very large consumption of space, we're crowding out much better opportunities because warehousing jobs are still, as Sharia pointed out, a lot of them are still minimum wage jobs or close to minimum wage jobs, definitely below average wage in the United States. And so, mind you, the statistics that I used did not include part-time work. They're just the full-time jobs that come out of the official EDD statistics. But, I don't see that this is really the shiny golden armor knight that helps us for the future.
So I want to kind of follow up on that a little bit. And Peggy, you had mentioned in your opening remarks this need to change the narrative, and that from what people suspect. So Johannes, you answered one of the questions I had. So that's 2021 data. So probably roughly, give or take, maybe 200,000 jobs in the industry today. So this is open to anybody. Peggy, I'll direct it to you. So how do we change? How does the narrative change? What kind of jobs are we talking about? And maybe for anybody, because numbers really help. What is the average pay of these kinds of jobs, and how is the pay scale range depending on what kind of jobs exist in the industry? Can anybody shed some light on those questions?
I mean, we go out and we do site walks at all of these facilities. We ask that question. It's probably the top question that we ask. It's how many full-time employees do you have? What kind of benefits are you offering your employees? And the question, everybody's paying around the $22 mark. I thought it was interesting is that through the pandemic, the one thing that we heard from our logistics industry, from our warehouse industry, let's say we surveyed 50 of them, was that the employees are very savvy. They'll leave a job and go take another job down the street that's paying $1 more an hour or get the bonus, and then they'll bounce out of there. So, the development of making sure that you've got this workforce that is sustainable for them. The workers themselves were creating a lot of the turmoil that was happening within these, and a lot of the turnover, but also just some of the issues that we saw that were happening within the industry itself. And yes, then they started the industry then started leaning on the temp workers and started leaning on what'd you call them?
Seasonals.
Yeah, the seasonals, but also those agencies that were providing these. And so this was just, again, this revolving door, this revolving, this carousel of folks jumping on and off and on and off. But for us, what we're seeing is now a lean into the more technically advanced jobs, the programming of the robotic system, making sure that the workers are being taken care of, creating a culture within the environment because they know that they're under a microscope right now, but creating a culture in the work environment itself that is bringing a voice. It's talking about the mental health of the employees. And so we've seen that shift over the last 2 years coming out of the pandemic, a complete, strengthening of the workforce through the worker themselves within the culture of that. What we're finding though is that we have to, again, I'm going to keep saying, changing the narratives. I think the opening comments were that land is cheap and labor is cheap. So, I mean, I heard one of our economists a couple of years ago say that the Inland Empire was, big and dumb. I don't want to hear that. When we talk about the Inland Empire, I want to talk about the skilled labor that we have, the workforce that we have through our construction industry and our building trades, the workforce that we have within our logistics and distribution industries, the workforce that we have on the airport. There's the economic engine in this region. I want to talk, we have to change this narrative, or we're going to start losing the workforce that we do have, and the inability to upskill that workforce to have, the mechanical engineers, and, as we start to electrify anything, all of those types of jobs. And I will tell you, those jobs are paying for us. We have one of our businesses that we surveyed. It's been around from 1908, almost all fully automated. The workforce there is making upwards of $90,000 a year. Over $90,000 a year for the majority of the workforce in an industry that's that's been around since 1908 and almost fully automated. We need to get out into these folks' places and start to walk their sites with them, walk with their employees, talk to their employees. And I think that, again, through the lens that I look through, it's, I'm not hearing the horror stories that are making the headlines.
Okay. Anybody response? Comment?
Well, it's not a horror story, it's data. The few warehouses that do that, the Amazon warehouses and those hyper automated ones, I mean, they're just a spearhead. At the end of the day, 75% of the logistics jobs in the Inland Empire, actually more in the Inland Empire, it's almost 80% in the logistics jobs in the Inland Empire, are automatable. So we have 200,000 people in those jobs right now. I mean, they're not going to go all away. Like the small warehouses are not going to adopt technology that quickly. Yesterday, I was on a call with the economic developers, and one of the people claimed that, we're talking to the robot developers all the time, and they say basically in 5-6 years we have generalized AI alike robots that can basically sweep their warehouses empty. I mean, then we've spent those 60 square miles, was it, of warehouse space that we have now in the Inland Empire, that's all just full of machines and doesn't support any jobs. I mean, except for a fraction in terms of the number of people that are in here right now. I mean, we had the drop in, if you look just in terms of millions of square feet, we started out in 1980 with about 350 people per million square feet. In between, it dropped before the e-commerce came, it dropped down to 150. That was a level of automation and space use and so on that we actually saw. And now it went up to 180 roughly because of the 15 times higher requirement of e-commerce and fulfillment center workforce than for the traditional redistribution stuff that came through the ports. I mean, Amazon is working on the dark warehouse. That's only leaving us with engineers. And you really believe that a person who can make $120,000 or more wants to live between two big warehouse blocks where the sun is blocked from all sides? I mean, we're really destroying our outlook of the future by sacrificing large amounts of areas for future development. I don't think, when I talk to entrepreneurs, and I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, then do they want to live next to warehouse blocks? Unless they sell logistics robots, they don't.
Okay.
I have a question about data, actually. So when you talk about that 180,000, and then we make references to warehouses, that 180,000 includes all of the occupational categories, right, that you're talking about. So that includes things like truck drivers, freight drivers, etc. So they're not all working in the warehouses. They're doing other work, right? Okay.
Yeah, that's just like but I think of the warehouses as an anchor. And so how much does that anchor really provide in terms of potential jobs? Because the warehouse is not living in a completely isolated economic space. It needs to be fed, it needs to be supported, it needs utilities and so on. And the way that the EDD provides the data is just in this particular category. In I picked the widest category to say, like, if we really look at the upper level of what permanent employment is supplied by the logistics sector, that's the really maximum. If we go to just warehouse workers, the numbers are much smaller.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So a couple questions. One, I think I'll direct it to Peggy. The other one to Shariar. So Peggy, I think you'd mentioned average pay is about $22 an hour. You mentioned that, you know, in Ontario there are a number of, I think
And
you
that's
said,
the average pay for the entry-level warehouse person.
okay, got it.
Okay,
And
that's not the average pay of the mechanical engineer. That's not the mechanical engineers are starting about $36 an hour.
Okay, got it. And are the mom and pop warehouses that you mentioned, do they pay more than the Amazon, Walmart people, less, or is it hard to quantify that?
No, we're finding that they're actually paying more because they're folks have been with them for a long period of time. They're not having the rapid turnover that we're seeing at the larger facilities like our Walmart, our Amazon. And so, you know, there's some loyalty there, and you find in these places, again, some of the ability for them to upskill their workers using, you know, the Intech Center to make sure that they are having the newest and latest training in the robotics. And so they are incorporating into their facilities, you know, some of the green technology and making sure that their employees are trained in those. So there is this. And then we're finding also that you'll have the father working there, and then the next generation is coming in. So the daughter and the son are working in this facility because they, again, have sustainable jobs there with benefits, with tuition reimbursement. So the benefit packages that are being offered at the smaller warehouses, the ones that are employing 25 or less. So we have such a mix here in Ontario, or as we say, Greater Ontario region. But, you know, Ontario is definitely the mecca. But I want to go back to something that the professor just mentioned, and that is, you know, there is such a wide berth of types of jobs here. And to me, it reminds me of a hospital. Not everybody's a doctor in a hospital. You know, you're going to still have the food service industry, the janitorial staff, the clerks in the office, the schedulers. All of these folks are within a hospital system or an education system. It's the same thing within a warehouse system. And so or the industry itself. You know, truck drivers are making over $100,000 a year, and they're driving clean trucks. So it is, again, changing the narrative for me has really been the last year, something that we've taken on and broken apart and had these discussions about. And I love these types of things because, again, it brings new voices to the table. And I think it's necessary for us as a region. I mean, I looked at your last two webinars, and it was, you know, quite interesting how myopic you got on those subjects. But the last one, or the first one that you had, just talking about the economic engine that this industry is for our region in all of our cities, I think is vitally important for us to continue to look at and to get the data, the right data, and to make sure that our communities, our elected officials are all being presented the information.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good comment. It makes me kind of thinking out loud that, you know, it might be an interesting comparison to take a look at, say 100 jobs in the warehousing logistic, and then break down what kind of jobs they are, and maybe compare them to other sectors and find out to what extent there's differences, you know. So, you know, the 22 hours, the $22 an hour, you said that was entry level, you know, that, you know, how that compares for people trying to make a living. You know, one of the panelists said at the outset, you know, the poverty rate in the two counties that has actually gone up in the last few years. I mean, I think I ran across data recently that said the average wage needed to afford the 2-bedroom apartment in the two counties is about $34 an hour. So
it is. We just did a whole panel on housing, and it's exactly right. So, yeah. I mean, it isn't because warehouses aren't paying enough. It's because our housing industry and our rental market has gone up so high in the last 2 years.
Hey, Rick.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just I was trying to pull up data since we're talking about data, and I'm a little uncomfortable talking about I want to make sure that we're talking about the same thing, right? And so I looked at the top, and this is at the national level, not at the regional level, but I looked at the BLS data at the national level, and the top three occupational categories for what's typically considered the logistics industry are industrial truck and tractor operators, laborers and freight stock and material movers, and stock and clerk and order fillers. Now, if you go into what their median hourly earnings are, right? So for those three categories, for the industrial truck and track operators, $21.61 an hour. Laborers and freight stock material movers, $18.92 an hour. And let's see, what was the third one? Stock clerks and order fillers, their median hourly wage is $19.01. So on the national level, that's what those three big occupational categories within that logistics industry are. And those tend to reflect, what we keep talking about, the different kinds of jobs that are available, but those three job categories are the biggest job categories within the industry of logistics and warehouses.
Now,
Very
clearly, inland Southern California is going to have a different wage structure than the national average.
Yes, but not by much.
Yeah,
Um,
we normally are lower than the national average. Just so like all the data that I know shows that our wage structure is lower than the national average. So like what Dr. Delarge just said is probably the upper limit. And these are the types of numbers that I also had in mind. And so we can figure it out like as we speak. I'm working on it right now. So.
okay. And real quick
Well, I think
real quick for you, Shahryar, you had mentioned, you representatives that you work with, Amazon and Walmart. The wages there are typically low for the entry levels. What do you see as necessary for those kinds of jobs to see an uptick in wages? What's necessary, and why is it not happening?
so. I think in terms of wages, what we've seen is, some different currents going in different directions. So the wages of, the minimum wage in California has gone up consistently for the last 7 years because of the minimum wage increases that were passed at the state level, and those have, obviously been aligned with, going through the period of the COVID expansion and all the expansion and goods movement that happened in 2020, 2021. So wages are significantly higher than they were in 2019, 2018, partly because of the wage increases from the minimum wage, partly because of inflation. So $15 an hour when Walmart went to $15 an hour in 2018 was a big deal, right? So I think that's part of it. What people have noted, I think, is the housing costs have gone up so fast and increased so quickly that it's really been hard for for all economies to all industries to be able to keep up. I think that's really concerning, for not just this sector but a lot of sectors. What we've seen is that the Amazon in particular has become the biggest private employer in the region, the biggest private employer in the state. That's why I'm talking about them quite a bit. About a third of the workers in the warehouse sector in the region are working for Amazon, partly because they've absorbed a lot of the workers that would have been in retail, right? The retail workers that were in those stores that are now collapsing are now doing work inside of these warehouses. They're doing delivery work, because that's where the work has been moved over to. So it's just kind of like understanding the way that the economy, that this part of the economy is changing, not just in terms of the kind of jobs, but the kind of work that's happening. So I'd say but the Amazon effect, Amazon went to $15 in 2018 or so. They've been very conservative about raising their standards and raising their wages since then. Even though they are clearly the economy, the driver, and everyone kind of cues off of them in terms of standards. I think the use of temporary workers, Amazon doesn't use staffing agencies, but they do use seasonal workers. They call them white badges to really keep a lot of high turnover. Times like now when the building up toward the Christmas rush, those kinds of things. And then the use of, again, staffing agencies to keep a high turnover in other warehouses. A lot of the big retailers use sometimes 25 to 50% of their workforce are employed through staffing agencies. Those inevitably are going to be at minimum wage or close to minimum wage. Why is that happening? Because there's, they're very powerful market actors, and they have the ability to keep wages low. And there is still a huge percentage of the folks in this region who are desperate for work. So I think that's kind of what we've seen. I think the housing costs going up so quickly the last couple of years is kind of the new wrinkle that's made it even harder for everyone. As people have moved from cities like LA looking to have more space during COVID, as housing costs have gone up in places in urban markets. It's become a couple of years ago, it was we didn't see a lot of displacement in places like San Bernardino. Now we see evictions in San Bernardino and Rialto or places like that. So it's really important for us to keep track of that and make sure that, again, like the companies especially that can't afford to do the right thing do raise their standards, because that's what it's going to take to keep our economy.
Great, thank you. Hey, next question for the panel. And this is a big one because it's one that we always hear, and it's this whole issue of advanced technology and how is that going to impact this particular industry. And it just kind of as a side comment, technology and AI and all, it impacts a whole lot of jobs. It's not just those that are in this particular industry. So I know Dr. Munoz, you do a lot of research on this. You could probably be much more articulate on this than I. But just real quickly from the panelists, what do you see as the positive and negative impacts of technology, recent technological advancements, future technological advancements on this particular industry? What's good about it? What's bad about it? What should we be prepared for?
Higher paying jobs is what's good about it. These will be higher paying jobs. What's bad about it is we don't have the skilled workforce right now. We're behind on the skilled workforce. Making sure that the emerging workforce is going to be capable of doing these jobs. We're just not there. And, is that an education issue? I don't think it's a warehouse issue. I think it's an education issue. I think the education, sector is about 2 years behind on our workforce needs. And that's something that we have been tackling for the last 10 years that I've been CEO of this organization. It's, we have, with our industries, all industries, we have found that education is about 2 years behind. And so how do we change that is, making sure that we have places like the InTech, making sure that we've got, the new facility that would be built in Jurupa Valley, that we've got something that is myopic when it comes to the training, that they go in, they get trained while they're working, and they are capable then of doing the jobs. We see it in even the aerospace industry. Times are changing and we have to change quickly with them, but we have to make sure folks stay employed while they're getting the training that they need. And that to me is the key piece to it. So we need to make sure that we create through our workforce development programs this bridge so that the small businesses especially have the capacity to train their workforce and don't lose those employees. And it is, I'm reading the comment here from Mayor Pro Tem Deborah Doris Parada, and she's 100% right. 50% of our students aren't prepared for the workforce. We need to change that data. We need to change. That data we have to change. But what I also want to say is we do have a skilled workforce in the Inland Empire when it comes to our building trades and our construction industry. These good paying jobs, building these warehouses, building the infrastructure, building our transportation infrastructure. These are great paying jobs. These are mortgage paying jobs. And that was something that we have always strived for, to make sure that our workforce has mortgage paying jobs. Unfortunately, the housing industry has exploded on us. And what was a mortgage paying job before is no longer a mortgage paying job now. And so it's, I think things will balance itself out. But the advancement and the change in the jobs is definitely means an increase in wages.
Yeah. Question for all of you. So agree with the comment that, you're going to replace these jobs with higher paying jobs. The big issue for the region is what do we do and how do we do it to keep those jobs here rather than having them be performed outside of the region?
That's a billion-dollar question, I guess. So yeah, I just want to actually say something about the housing market, since it came up several times and Peggy just mentioned it again. We need to just also acknowledge that 60 square miles of warehouses are equivalent to 160,000 space for quarter-acre single-family homes. So, and some of the housing prices that we're seeing is not only construction related, it's also space related. That, you know, like warehouses crowd out residential space. So you can say, oh, it's zoning and so on. Yeah, I know those arguments, but like at the end of the day, space is space. So, but I see actually a lot more opportunities for improvements, and that ties into your question, Rick. So, because thanks to technology, we have exoskeletons now. It's one of the fastest growing adoptions that make the taxing warehouse jobs easier to do. So they grow at like 40% per year. So like if you look at the Amazon robots, Amazon has been growing at almost 100% per year, their robot deployment since 2013. It has slowed down recently, but it's you know, it's still staggering numbers. So these numbers are real and bring improvements to the quality of work for the people in the warehouses. And so we need to really recognize that. And automation and technology also reduces the space requirement per turnover unit, because you can achieve faster turnover, higher picking accuracy, and all the metrics that people normally use for warehouse productivity measures. So there's really a lot going on. The question how we can get those keep those jobs here is through the quality of life, because, you know, like, I mean, why did I come to Southern California from Chicago? Well, I actually got my PhD from UCSD, so I knew it was beautiful here. Number one, and so, but we need to preserve that beauty. And you know, if we cover everything with warehouses, this beauty is not going to be preserved. So that higher earning people are willing to stay in the region. And the second is, you know, I mean, I'm just stunned about the volatility of regulation in California in general. We need to come up with some sort of you know, moratorium that we say like, hey, those regulations are now going to be in place for the next 3 years or 5 years, so that business can actually say, okay, I know what I'm getting myself into, at least I have 5 years of planning security. And then everything that is literally taken care of or like is changed in the meantime will take effect 5 years later. Yes, that's a delay, but we have to have a trade-off between predictability for the businesses, or we need to really create special economic zones where we allow certain types of high value production and jobs taking place in special economic zones that we kind of literally fence off and make isolated regulation islands that are not as affected. That's the only way I can see it, because we see now a huge wave of repatriation of jobs rolling onto us from China, because, you know, like think of Adidas. Adidas has now like 2 factories that I know of, one in Germany, one in Atlanta, where they 3D print shoes with 160 people, but they replaced 1,000 workers in Vietnam with that. So, I mean, we are seeing this repatriation. We can do this thing here. We need to make sure that those jobs are not landing in St. Louis, Missouri, because of the logistics preferable location there. We need to make sure that they can stay here. And for that, we need to give predictability to the employers.
Great. Any other comments? Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left, so let's just kind of move. I'm going to kind of combine a couple questions. So, what, you know, in this whole field, this field of employment and warehousing, you've kind of touched on it, but I'd like for each of you to take a couple minutes and maybe give us and the audience some of your thoughts on, you know, what needs to be done in the way of job growth and economy in mind in the region that maybe is not currently being done, focused on this industry. And then for us at ICSD, how do you see us contributing to this dialogue? Is there a niche area that isn't being filled that perhaps UCR research can assist in?
So I would say, in addition to all the conversation we've had about automation, I think the question around kind of transition to zero or close to zero emission logistics is really a key question. I think in relation to the previous conversation, right, like I think the question of, you know, California competing on cost alone with the Texases of the world is not really going to happen. But whether it's just on wages or on housing costs, all those different things, partly because we do have more regulation, partly because our housing costs are higher. There's other things that we can compete on, and I think that the state has been able to do so. And the opportunity right now is the transition to you know, a sustainable economy. If that doesn't happen here in California, it's not going to happen in this country, and then we're really in trouble. But it's also an opportunity for the state to take advantage, in the region to take advantage of the huge amount of federal money that's coming down the pipe from the Biden infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. What's infrastructure? Infrastructure is a chance for us to transition this polluting system into something that is sustainable. You know, these warehouses, from my perspective, are not going anywhere. You can have a marginal change of where the growth is happening, but there's trillions of dollars worth of infrastructure that's already here that the goods movement sector has placed here, sometimes with the federal government's help, and it's not going anywhere. We're near the port. Until we get flooded out by global warming, we're at the port, right? And that's the opportunity. Is California. We do have, you know, our pluses and minuses, but I think the opportunity is for us to lean into this transition, train people to be maintaining and operating zero emission vehicles, to be producing zero emission vehicles, right? For us to be the place where all those things happen with good quality jobs, with, you know, perspective towards sustainability. I think that's possible. I think that's a model that a lot of folks in the region are starting to think about, but it has to be done intentionally, and I think now's the time to do it.
Thank you.
Mute. I'm on mute. The key point I think that Shahryar just touched on is this other point. You know, when we think about infrastructure, we don't often think about the social infrastructure that's required in order to build out and think about, you know, creating resilient regions. And I know that I think someone mentioned in this conversation the new Trade Technical College is going to be built in Jurupa Valley, which is an initiative that comes out of the Community Economic Resilience Fund out of the state of California. And that campaign and that entire endeavor has embraced this notion about community-led development, where community organizations are an integral part of defining what it means to build a sustainable long-term economic development plan that includes all of these issues that we've been addressing in terms about environmental issues, but around also social equity issues and wages, et cetera. And it's, you know, you also talked about the federal money. I think that's right. You know, we just saw less than a month ago, the Biden administration announced that California was going to be one of the main regions for this hydrogen infrastructure project. And that comes directly out of this SURF process as well, because California Forward, et cetera, we're working on these. And so you see a conversation now where for a long time, I think it was left up to the sort of the interest of business entities that were sort of coming into the region and using the region as an opportunity for investment. But I think that kind of model won't work unless there is a social infrastructure that's also taking into consideration the long-term sustainability, not only of the environment, but also of the communities, meaning the people that live in that region. Because I don't think that the you know, the private sector will address all of those things. And so when we think about infrastructure, it's not just about the traditional gray infrastructure of concrete, et cetera. And it's not just only about also the green infrastructure that is now widely embraced, but it's also thinking about the role that communities play in deciding how these resources are going to be spent and what kind of development communities want in their region. And so I think social infrastructure is a huge part of that, which means that, you know, the people that are working and living in these neighborhoods and in these warehouses should absolutely be part of these conversations.
Thank you. Johannes or Peggy, comments?
Well, I'm going to say There's something that going for the last 2 years, local control needs to be part of the conversation also. We need to make sure that our elected officials at the local level, at the planning level and at the development level, have a voice. And it can't be usurped from the state or federal government, especially from the state. And, when we look at what's best for our communities, I'm going to agree with Dr. Delara, is we need to make sure that the community has a voice, and that's through their local elected officials. And we've seen some changes that have been handed down from the state level that have such a negative impact on our local economies, our local communities. And so I want to flip it back to where, we elect our local officials to sit on that dais, and we know that they have our best interest at heart, and we have access to those local elected officials. So when it comes to putting a 6-story, multi-million square foot Amazon warehouse in the southern part of Ontario, that is something that, our developers met with our planners here in the region, with our city folks, and it was the right decision to make. And so it's to look at this from a 30,000-foot level, to try to implement legislation from the state level that is going to again have this broad brush effect on our region, I think is the wrong approach to it. We need to give local control back to our local elected officials. We need to make sure that the community has a voice, and they do that through those local elected officials. So, when you look at what you all can do, it was something that we talked about a lot, and that's the data. I think that we need to have current data. We can't have data that goes back 25 years that we keep reaching at and pulling forward and saying, this is how this is. It's not. And that is something that we find as an organization when we have these kind of balanced conversation, is I want to make sure that the data that we're talking about is the most current data that's available. And I'm going to lean on our educators and our institutionals of higher education for that data. And I'm going to look at our workforce development groups for that data. And I don't want something that is dated. I don't want something that's going to take me during the pandemic, which was, a blip in time here. I want to have what's the most current data, so that when we're asking our elected officials to make decisions, when we're asking our city planners to change general plan, when we're asking those things about our workforce, that we're making these decisions based on the most up-to-date recent information, and so that we have decisions that are made that will be sustainable in the future and for next generations. By the way, I just want to go back to something. My 19-year-old grandson just got a job at Amazon San Bernardino, and he's paying $22.50 an hour. So this is current data. This boy is a high school graduate, and that is it. He's on the spectrum, but $22.50 an hour at Amazon San Bernardino. So current data.
Good for him. Dr. Munoz, any quick
Yeah,
comment?
one, just briefly, because we're running up at the hour. I think, yes, I agree with actually what all other previous panelists said. I do think that there are 2, 3, 4 distinct things that you could support. Number one is, what we need to, in order to get current data, is we need to and local control, is we need to cultivate the idea of the citizen scientist. So I work here with a startup specifically that actually does that specifically for airport noise. So with that startup, we're producing noise sensors that automatically detect when airplanes come in, and how much noise they produce, the tail number, and what have you, so that we actually have an idea of what's going on there. And there are like a couple of hundred installed around Chicago or O'Hare. So that's all in private households. So this is citizen scientists. So sensors, those types of sensors, as we are in the time of the Internet of Things, can be used anywhere, whether it's in warehouses or whether it's in industries and so on, to really understand what is going on economically. Secondly, it would be great if you and your resources could really look at the quality of jobs that is happening in the major industries, or specifically the logistics industry that is there. Because, I love those anecdotal stories, but I would rather like to see some systematic analysis of what's going on. And the third area, which we're doing at the University of Redlands, maybe you can see that what we're doing. So we've included I specifically have included both artificial intelligence and virtual reality in my classes. So that offers huge opportunities for accelerating the training of the workforce that all other panelists have asked for and argued for. So, we need actually more automation in the logistics industry quicker, so that we can set the people free there, so that we can train them quickly with the new technologies for better paying jobs, for those jobs that drive the robots in the warehouses and so on. So if you could support that, I think that would be a wonderful job. Thank you so much for the time, and thank you for inviting me.
Great. All right. Well, lots more we could go. Unfortunately, we're constrained to an hour, but Dr. Juan de Lara, Sheryar Kausji, Peggy Hazlett, and Dr. Johannes Munoz, thank you so much for your time and for your expertise. Certainly a lot of work to do. For those of you that participated, thank you for being here. We will transmit your questions to the panelists and get some responses and get them back to you. So don't feel like your questions are going unanswered, or your comments. We'll make sure we do that. Again, we ask you to thank you all for participating. We look forward to seeing you again on January 11th when we convene our logistics and warehousing panel to discuss transportation. So thanks for spending your Thursday afternoon with us. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Rick. Well done.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Stick around for a minute. You guys stick around for a minute.
Okay.
I think we lost Dr. de Lara.